Well, I'm delighted to be able to welcome the web-based audience to Penguin's headquarters here. Many stories beneath the surface of London. And I've got Will Self with me here today to discuss his latest novel, Shark, and it's an exciting opportunity for me to be able to talk to him and get some objective answers to the kind of questions that I want to pose, rather than simply having to listen all the time as I do to the slightly psychotic stream of consciousness that purls through his head like a deranged stream. So, Will, I think first off I'd just like to ask you in very general terms what the kind of genesis of this new novel, Shark, was.
Well, towards the end of working on Umbrella, I began, as is my wont, casting around or kind of picking up some ideas that I had previously about another novel. And in fact, I was thinking about writing a book in some ways inspired by W.G. Zabolt's book, The Emigrants. And what I particularly liked about Zabolt's The Emigrants was that it used the biographies of these six characters, these six diverse characters, all of whom were refugees from the Nazis' regime, to describe the shape of the Holocaust without actually descending to the crudity of describing the Holocaust itself. And I thought this was a very powerful and kind of emotive technique to use. And I started thinking about writing a comparable book about my own experience with drug addiction, and particularly about the people I had known, some of the addicts I had known. And you know, I've written about addiction quite a lot in the past, and in some ways I felt leery about doing another book that focused on it. But the Emigrants idea applied to it meant I could write a book about the way that addictive illness had deformed these people's lives without necessarily writing about taking drugs or drinking alcohol abusively at all. And so the kind of working rubric for that book was Jaws without the shark, was this idea of conveying the kind of enormity of this kind of ravaging illness without actually describing it, just looking at the mayhem it caused in people's lives.
Will, your writing nowadays is often accused, if you can accuse something that is passive, like a piece of writing, I suppose it's you who are really being accused of kind of being willfully difficult and obscure, and creating kind of hard work for your readers who perhaps don't want to open a book and have to work at it. What's your response to some of these criticisms?
Well, people say that things are hard. My writing, among other people's, is kind of hard work or difficult, or that it's not necessarily entertaining, and there's something kind of willfully obscure about this, as if it's some kind of insult to the reader. I've said in the past, I said in an interview with The Guardian when Umbrella came out that I didn't write for readers, and this is kind of I've had to carry this around my neck like some sort of cross. How dare he say that? It was misinterpreted. It's not that I don't wish to be read, or that I don't believe in reading or believe in readers. It's just that, like any other writer who I think is serious about what she or he is trying to do, I don't have an idea of the reader. And there's a paradox there. The reader can be anybody and nobody. But the minute you type the reader, you say, I'm writing for, 30 to 40-year-old AB1s who live in the Potteries, then you're ruling out, you're both canalising the way you approach the text, and you're in a sense ruling people out of reading it. You're being more dismissive of all the people who don't conform to that paradigm than you are if you don't have a specific reader in mind. What I do is try and create works of literary art, and if people are interested in reading them, fine. If they're not, I'm afraid to say I have to accept that as well. I can't go around and hold a gun to their heads and force them to do it.
Will, once again, at the centre of Shark, we find your kind of perennial protagonist, Dr. Zach Bisner. Can you tell me how your relationship with Bisner as a character has altered over the years? He first appeared in your 1991 debut short story cycle, The Quantity Theory of Insanity. So he's kind of been with you now for nearly a quarter of a century. How are you getting on with him?
Well, it's a very interesting question about Bisner, but may I say that you're much taller than I thought you would be, having seen you on television, and in the mirror for that matter. As to Bisner, yes, he started out, I was interested in psychiatrists, both because of my own experience of mental illness when I was an adolescent and a young man, and seeing a lot of psychiatrists in action at that time. And also really for you kind of theoretical reasons, in the sense that, you know, I was very influenced by the anti-psychiatrists, by people like R.D. Laing and Thomas Zage, who I read when I was a young man. And I became very interested in the idea that the psychiatrist is like a kind of modern priest, witch doctor. You know, that it's actually psychiatrists who are concerned with making judgments about our mental states, making judgments about whether we're sane or mad, whether we're socially acceptable or unacceptable. That they have, particularly in societies like our own, where there's socialised medicine and a state network that determines whether you'll be sectioned and put in a mental hospital or not. These people are kind of immensely powerful in a philosophic sense, in a moral and philosophic sense. So Bisner really came in because of that. You know, I wanted a figure who I could use to investigate some of these ideas, and for that reason he remained through the early narratives in which he appeared, which go up to and include things like Great Apes, where he has quite a major role. He remained, in a way, a bit of a cardboard cutout. He didn't have much inner life. I wasn't really interested in his inner life. And then I wrote this book, Walking to Hollywood, which is like a kind of fictionalized memoir. And I wrote about Bisner more in that, and, you know, pushed forward the idea that, you know, maybe he'd been my own therapist to some extent, which had a kind of truth to it in a way. I'd been writing about this shrink for 20 years by that point, and he did have that kind of strange relationship with me. And then coming forward to Umbrella, it seemed natural, and it seemed meet, to use a Shakespearean term, to go inside Bisner, start seeing what his internal mental life was like, and that was very exciting for me. It was like getting to know somebody who'd been an acquaintance for years and years, and then getting to know them at a more intimate level. And that kind of relationship has now continued on as he appears in Shark, and will continue and progress still further as he appears as one of the protagonists of the third part of the trilogy.
There was, in fact, one final question in the interview that I asked Will, or rather I didn't ask him, I asked him if there was a question that he'd never been asked in an interview that he would like me to ask him. And he said he would prefer it if I didn't ask him the question myself, but if he were allowed to ask himself the question quietly. And he then asked himself the question and subsided into hysterical laughter and had to be taken out of the room. But for all that, it felt like a kind of fruitful interview, insofar as an interview can be fruitful.